What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the very last episode of our really grand finale series here of Studs and Duds for the 2023 season, where we're talking about all the rising and falling players around the NFL. Thank you, everybody, for watching, whether you are just hopping in for your team here in the AFC West or you binged all 10 hours of this finale series. It means a lot. A lot goes into this series, so I really appreciate you guys for watching. It's one of the more unique things we do on this channel, but I know the diehards love it. But before we do get started, as always, I like to let people that may be new to the series know what Studs and Duds is all about. And what you may not know is back in 2016, this channel got its start actually as a Madden channel, where I have a custom community roster where I go and edit the player ratings to be what are, in my opinion, more accurate and realistic. And then, you know, I'd come on here and talk about what I was seeing in the games and why I made those changes. And while I no longer make Madden content on this channel, I do still do some rebuilds and stuff over on TFG Plays, my second channel, if you want to check that out. I do still make that roster and this series because it's a great way for me to do my research and stay on top of everybody around the league, but it's also a great way to convey and take a wide lens look at who the rising and falling players around the league are, who's trending up, who's maybe not playing so well for every single player around the NFL. And throughout this video, you're going to be seeing those Madden ratings going up or down. But I do want you to know that those changes do a pretty good job to reflect how I perceive these players in real life, and the changes certainly stem from me watching the film and doing my own research and analysis. But without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy. Please do hit that like button as we get into it, and let's get started. And today we finish up Studs and Duds for the season with the AFC West. Thank you, AFC West fans, for your patience. You can blame the Kansas City Chiefs for doing it again, making you wait. But let's start with the Denver Broncos here, and an interesting season for Denver. It's Sean Payton's first year. I feel like we've got a lot of interesting players to talk about here that are lower name players, less known players, I should say, that are just kind of like laying the groundwork for the Sean Payton era. A bunch of guys from different places that I think bought into Sean Payton's culture, earned some playing time this season, and I think earned a role on the field, but also off the field to kind of help set the tone and the culture here. But anyway, let's talk about a little bit of a bigger name here with the Broncos star of the season, which is what we've been calling this highlight player. What this really is just the biggest riser from this review period, which is going to be week 9 on. But in the case of Lloyd Cushenberry, he really was one of the highest rising, biggest kind of breakout players in a way for the season for Denver. And he did it here in a contract year. Their starting center. Cushenberry's been a very solid player, certainly a starting caliber player, and someone that's gotten, I would say, incrementally better year by year. But I think took a big leap here with Sean Payton stepping in. A new system definitely worked for him, but I think also just kind of reaching his physical prime here at 26 years old. Again, in a contract year, he's going to be a guy to monitor in free agency. He's not going to be cheap for Denver. If they want to re-sign him, he's probably going to cost anywhere north of $10 million a year. And obviously we know people are looking to pay offensive linemen in free agency when they do hit the market. So the market will tell us what the NFL thinks about him. But I certainly think Cushenberry has settled in as a top 10 center in the NFL, took massive strides in his run blocking this year. You know, they've been doing the sort of wide zone style offense here in Denver. And with Sean Payton, they became much more of a north-south team, and Cushenberry is a bigger, by modern standards, a bigger center, 6'4", 315 pounds. When he was drafted, it was that kind of anchor and play strength that was his selling point, and that definitely shined through in a bit more of a gap-heavy type of run scheme here. Not that he can't block wide zone, but I do think he's better kind of being that pivot point on the center for a power or duo and just kind of driving out that interior of the D line there. So Lloyd Cushenberry, a fantastic season. due for a big payday. Let's continue to talk about the offense here. Russell Wilson getting benched here. I do think Russ, I don't think he deserved to be benched. I thought he was playing like a starting caliber quarterback. The Broncos were competing, but obviously some behind the scenes stuff going on, and Sean Payton had determined that Russ was not going to be their quarterback next year. He wants to get ahead of that contract situation, prevent injury, and make the best decision that he feels for the team, even if it was a little bit diabolical to do what he did. But I do think Russ does need to continue to come down from that high ranking, obviously, when the Broncos acquired him. He's going to hit free agency here. I don't even know necessarily where he's going to fall here. I just went on Matthew Coller's podcast, and we were talking about where these veteran quarterbacks were going to land. And I wouldn't be totally stunned if Russ doesn't get a starting job right away, and he kind of does the, it's weird to say the Carson Wentz thing, but because I don't think he's as low of a level as Carson Wentz fell to, but basically just wait until a quarterback goes down and that phone comes calling. Again, we'll see how that all plays out. I still view him as one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the league, but he's a hell of a lot closer to 32 nowadays than he is to the top 5. Basically, when the Broncos acquired him is roughly where we viewed Russ. So that fall's been pretty steep. I think if you want to talk about on the field and why Sean Payton did get frustrated with him, I do think his inability to see, read, and attack the middle of the field on time is such a big part of Sean Payton's offense. Myself and many people talked about how that is a interesting fit. Knowing the style of offense Sean Payton likes to run, having Drew Brees and all that, and it just didn't work out. So he's going to come down. We'll see where his future lies elsewhere, because it won't be here in Denver. Let's talk about the running backs here. Jaleel McLaughlin going to continue to go up. Didn't quite have the continuation of those massive explosive games he had earlier, but still played a role for this team and still kept up some pretty good runs in there. He dropped down really in the last couple months of the season. He dropped down to only getting about 2 or 3 touches a game for a while there. And then week 16, week 17, he got 6 touches for 37 yards, 6.2 average. 8 touches for 44 yards, 5.5 average. Was relatively steady in terms of catching the ball out of the backfield all year long. So I definitely think he's a talented guy. It just hasn't been a very large sample size, a ton of explosiveness. He's also got to be mentioned with these undersized backs this year, obviously with Jahmyr Gibbs, but Keaton Mitchell in Baltimore, Devon Achane in Miami, and then Jaleel McLaughlin here in Denver. That's 4 guys that are tiny running backs, but super explosive and have found ways to be effective in this modern NFL. So I think as a second running back next year, Jaleel McLaughlin can provide some juice for this offense. But the hope is that he can be the complement to Javonte Williams, who I've got some notes on. I didn't feel it was necessary to lower him from his 82 rating because he looked so freaking good early in his career. But we knew coming into this year, coming off that really gruesome knee injury, that basically a lot of doctors were saying, have some patience with Javonte Williams. I know he was someone I was thinking about in fantasy football, and every expert doctor was like, this was a really bad one. And we've seen players like this in the past take a whole extra year to kind of get back to speed. And for that reason, I didn't think it was comfortable to drop Javonte Williams. But, man, 3.6 yards per attempt on 217 carries. It didn't get better as the year went on. In fact, it got worse. He had stat lines like 11 carries for 24 yards, 15 carries for 41 yards, 12 carries for 27 yards, all down the stretch this season. So really starting to get worried about the idea that he can get back to being that explosive bell cow back. I didn't want to lower him because of the context of that injury, but if we get to next year, and again, he's just not very efficient, definitely going to be someone that is basically falling faster than other players with the context of this season now applying to next year. So someone to keep an eye on next year for sure. But let's talk about some of these wide receivers. Honestly, I think Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, they were themselves. I didn't feel the need to change their ratings, but Some of these rotational guys have emerged as complementary weapons for the Broncos. I think both have a good case to be back for what they do. You've got Brandon Johnson, who's a little bit of a bigger bodied kind of wide receiver 4 type. They would rotate him in and get him going. Like, he was at his best really attacking the middle of the field, digs, crossing routes, slants, that kind of stuff. Made some tough catches, made some good run after catch stuff happen. So gonna go up to kind of that wide receiver 4 territory. And then Lil Jordan Humphrey, one of the best names in all of football. He followed Sean Payton over from New Orleans. And, you know, I've always been fascinated by LJ Humphrey because he's this big-bodied kind of tweener receiver. He's half tight end, half running back, half wide receiver, just kind of a playmaker type and a big slot type. And once Jawan Jennings really emerged in New Orleans in a very similar role as that big slot quasi-tight end, Lil Jordan Humphrey was rendered relatively useless because they also have Taysom Hill and all those guys. So obviously, Sean Payton liked what he saw, took him over here to Denver and got him going down the stretch, and was exactly. I mean, you can see why. He was run blocking his ass off from the slot, using that 225, 6'4" body to set the edge and you know, drive guys off the perimeter. Good in the screen game too in that way. So he's an asset there, but he's really tough to bring down after the catch. He's elusive and creative, and you know, he can catch the ball and do some stuff in the short to intermediate game. So he's an interesting chess piece that does have a very solid role in this offense, and I think he'll be back doing that. Then we go to the offensive line. We already talked about Lloyd Cushenberry, but his running mate next to him, Quinn Miners. I don't even really want to say it's a breakout year for him because I think Quinn's been very good since he came into the league, but he as well has just been steadily climbing. Such a freak athlete out of Wisconsin Whitewater, and his run blocking is genuinely some of the best in the National Football League for the guard position. And he's heading into a contract year next year. He's been a solid pass protector and gotten better at it, but with where his run blocking was at this year, like they had a couple primetime games and Collinsworth just wouldn't stop talking about Quinn Miners, highlighting his blocks, getting to the second level, driving guys off the ball. He's a monster, man. I'm a huge fan of Quinn Miners, and if he can become more of a good pass protector as opposed to just a solid one in a contract year next year, you're probably talking about someone that is entering that conversation for, like, you know, premium guards, guys that get paid $15-16 million. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility for Quinn Miners, and the thought of him getting a little extra motivation for that big price tag next year, he could tear the league up next year. I'm a big fan of Quinn. But let's flip over to the defense here. This defense in the second half of the year really did impress. They found a bunch of guys to contribute here. Vance Joseph really saved his job, and you know, with how things started as a historically bad unit, they were perfectly average in the middle of the year, and that's impressive. And a lot of these guys in the front are to thank for that. I look at Zach Allen, who was a big free agent signing for them. They basically decided Zach Allen, who played for Vance Joseph in Arizona, was a cheaper replacement for Draymond Jones via free agency, and you get that scheme familiarity, and honestly, Zach Allen was better than Draymond Jones this year. 60 pressures, 7 sacks. He continues to get more and more comfortable, I think, as a run defender. As a interior defensive lineman, Allen was an edge player coming out of Boston College, someone that I had a late first-round grade on, and he ended up going in the third round for Arizona. But I think that's proved out, man. Like, he is a $15 million D lineman on a second contract, getting you 60 pressures from the interior. That's a heck of a player, man. And I think that contract was well worth it for the Broncos. And then DJ Jones is going to come down. He's getting up there in age. His run defense profile is decreasing, and his pass rushing profile has fallen off. He had a couple nice years there where he was looking like a decent enough number 2 rusher on the interior, and not so much this year. DJ Jones had just 18 pressures on 330 pass rush snaps. That's pretty damn bad, about 5% pass rush pressure rate, and just 2 QB hits, 2 QB sacks, so they weren't like high impact pressures really either. So yeah, he's going to come down. I don't think Broncos fans are going to argue too much with that. Wouldn't be stunned if he was kind of a cap casualty here from the former regime. But then on the edge, these guys I think were the integral part of this defense turning it around. And it really started around like week 6 when Baron Browning comes back. They get rid of Frank Clark and Randy Gregory and just go with this trio here of Jonathan Cooper, Baron Browning, and Nick Bonito. And I'm actually going to start with Jonathan Cooper, who just continues to hold on to this job. He had almost as many total snaps as both Browning and Bonito combined. A big part of that was he was available. He played all 17 games. They always say the best ability is availability, and man, his commitment, I think, in the locker room, I think he is a really high work ethic guy, and I think he's reached his ceiling, man. Like, he is not the biggest edge, he's not the fastest edge, the bendiest edge, any of it, but he's just a super solid player, and he produced like a very good number 2 edge rusher this year. 55 pressures on 421 pass rush snaps. So again, if you're getting a 10% pressure rate, that's basically an average number 2 edge player in the league. And at 55 pressures to 421 snaps, that's well over 10%. So he was pushing the pocket. He was making the quarterback uncomfortable. He ended up with 9 sacks. And as he's done, was an impact as a run defender. That's really where he first started getting all this playing time, was how physical and disciplined he was against the run up front. So Jonathan Cooper really impressed me this season. But then these other 2 guys, they're the ones that Broncos fans are really excited about, and rightfully so. 2 mid-round picks here over the last few years, Baron Browning and Nick Bonito. I've said this before, but I will maintain this point, that this is the most athletic edge rush duo in the NFL. Nick Bonito and Baron Browning. Browning, who was an off-ball linebacker coming out of Ohio State, even played off-ball initially for the Broncos, but a dude with absurd change of direction, speed, acceleration, bend, and the size to play edge. And eventually Denver was like, hey, that Micah Parsons guy made this transition look pretty good in Dallas. I think we have a guy of relatively similar athletic profile, and that's saying a lot. Like, we just watched Micah Parsons destroy the NBA All-Star game and put his freak athleticism on display compared to normal-looking human beings. But anyway, Baron Browning, the fact that you can say he's somewhat close to Micah Parsons, athletically speaking, is a testament to Baron Browning, and it's true. And he's really worked at this pass rushing skill set. He's got spin moves, he's got a rip move, and the more and more he plays this position, just as we've seen with Micah Parsons, that efficiency's only going up. The thing with Baron Browning has been availability, injuries. He's really only played 1 full season when you combine the last 2 years. But what's crazy is if you just stack up all of his pass rush snaps from the last 2 years, it puts him at 550 pass rush snaps for 73 pressures and 11 sacks. There were a few players that got about 550 pass rush snaps this year. Those players were Chase Young, had almost identical stats, 74 pressures, 11 sacks. TJ Watt, 86 pressures, 20 sacks. Jadeveon Clowney, 78 pressures, 11 sacks. So his numbers over the last 2 years as an edge rusher are right there with the likes of Chase Young, TJ Watt, and Jadeveon Clowney. A little bit further behind TJ Watt for sure. I gotta say that because people think I hate TJ Watt, but not too far behind him. So that is the type of efficiency we're seeing from Baron Browning. Now it's just a matter of course, continuing to refine that pass rushing tool belt, but honestly, it's more about availability for Baron Browning. If he can play a full year, you are talking about a guy now heading into a contract year next year that could be looking to earn a massive, massive contract in a breakout year. He's going to be a good candidate for you guys making your breakout player lists next year for sure. And then Nick Bonito, who my pro comp was a literal lightning in a bottle, who had some of the most absurd get-off speed and bend I've ever seen for an edge prospect. he has packaged that at the NFL level. And honestly, he's still very much only packaging that. Usually when I see Nick Bonito, it is him just flying off the edge, running around a tackle, and then he starts to, use the threat of that edge to start working on some inside counters. And that's when you can start to kind of say, all right, I've got him where I want him. We'll get to the bull rush or, the spin move, whatever, the swim move. That's when you can really start to dominate matchups, is when they're afraid of either speed to the corner or your bull rush, and then you can start to stem moves off of that. So that's going to be the next step for Nick Bonito. But again, Bonito had a very good year. 47 pressures, 9 sacks on 276 pass rush snaps. So that's a pressure rate of almost 20%. That's elite territory. Now, I will say 13 of those pressures uniquely came against the Chiefs. This is an advantage that the Broncos have, and it's a great thing that Nick Bonito has. But because of his ability to get upfield, it's a nightmare combination with Patrick Mahomes, who likes to get a lot of depth in his drops, kind of famously. It's already a challenge for offensive tackles to basically win that angle. But when you have a guy like Nick Bonito, who again has historically good get off and speed, he was a real problem against the Chiefs at just making Patrick Mahomes feel uncomfortable, because he would get to that deep 10 yardage drop that he likes to take, and Nick Bonito was on him and he had to step up and get working right away. So it wasn't really like Bonito beating his man in those Chiefs games a lot of the times. It was just him running upfield and taking advantage of that matchup. So that's why his overall grading profile, if you want to talk about PFF grade, probably doesn't live quite up to that 20% pressure rate, because PFF is going to give you better grades if you're actually beating the guy. But that's not to say that those wins didn't show up in other matchups either. So really excited for this combo. And then you have Jonathan Cooper, who, I think he can be a low-end number 2 rusher, as he showed this year. But ideally next year, you're going to have Bonito and Browning with more, at least pass rush snaps. And then you have the perfect number 3 guy there in Jonathan Cooper. So this is certainly one of the more underrated position groups, I think, in the league, or position rooms in the league, is the Broncos edge group that I think is just getting started here. And again, was a huge part of their second half success. Then you turn to the secondary. I think the linebackers, Judy and Singleton, did their thing. Not much to really say about them. But into the secondary, these guys did play solid. Jaquan McMillan, who had a breakout year 2 here, undrafted player, slot corner, made a bunch of big plays for this defense, breaking up slot, screens, had 2 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, really was an instinctive playmaker. And we gave him a lot of love early in the year here in Studs and Duds. But I will say he continued to be an impactful slot corner, and I think is easily their starter next year. But once you got down the stretch this year, he started to get beat in coverage quite a bit more. Targeted 10 times by the Cleveland Browns for 6 receptions and 80 yards. Gave up 43 yards on 6 targets against the Chargers. 93 yards, giving up 5 out of his 5 targets against the New England Patriots. And then was credited with 2 touchdowns allowed in Week 18 against Las Vegas. So you did see some coverage deficiencies certainly start to show up, but a young player that showed that he can make plays on the ball and make some stuff happen in coverage. I don't think he has athletic limitations. It's just going to come down to getting more playing time and getting better there. I still very much believe in the player, and even despite some of those lower games, I still wanted to boost him up a little bit there. But then Fabian Moreau, the 30-year-old veteran here, I just think he's a really solid CB2 option. He's still more towards the bottom in terms of number 2 starters in the league, but he's 6 foot, 200 pounds. He ran a 4.35 coming out of UCLA. He went in the 3rd round for a reason, but he just hasn't been able to settle down anywhere because he's been so inconsistent. He's been overly grabby at times. He's lacked zone instincts at times. Definitely his best year here, I think, just as he's stuck around the league. Taken to coaching, become more of a mature player on the field. I really think he can be a starting caliber option, whether that's for Denver here or someone else. I imagine he's going to hit the market not a lockdown guy by any stretch of the imagination. He's still going to, give up about 2/3 of his targets. Not a ton of ball production, just 5 pass breakups, 1 interception, but didn't give up a ton of huge plays either. So he could be a player, obviously if Denver brings him back, I think it's a solid signing, but he could be a player too for like really bad secondaries out there. He could be a nice signing and someone that I think still has a couple years in the tank of just like solid cornerback play at this point. And then the last guy we got to talk about here is the safety, PJ Locke, who honestly I did not like what we saw from him in coverage, but he was all over the field in run defense. And he played a lot this year with some of the different injuries they had to deal with at safety this year. And he made some highlight plays coming down, making some hits, plays on balls, that kind of stuff. But you definitely saw number 6 trailing behind pass completions quite a bit this year as well. So I don't think it's anything crazy, but a decent year. Probably going to go back to being a special teamer and maybe a dime safety for them. But yeah, interesting year for Denver and an interesting offseason ahead. Next up, we have the Los Angeles Chargers. And man, the more time I spent with this roster here for this video, the more I realized how much work Harbaugh and new general manager Joe Hortiz, which I think I said that right. You guys will have to let me know in the comments down below. But the more I realized how much work those guys have to do, it's not to say that this team can't be great and great right away, but man, years of really poor drafting. I know they've had some hits, but just poor drafting that led to the firing of Tom Telesco, and some of these veterans are regressing. Really, it takes a little bit off the top of this team, and yeah, it's not as good of a roster as we would have said maybe 2 years ago for this Chargers team. But let's start on a positive note with someone that was a hit in the draft and someone I was brutally wrong about, Alohi Gilman, who was a 6th-round pick for the Chargers, and I just didn't think Gilman had the speed to make it at safety in the NFL, and boy, that just has not mattered. For one, I think his first step and his acceleration and the time that he's put into not just the weight room, but, his just workouts in general. He has excellent lower body explosiveness, even if he can't max out super fast. But you can tell, when he triggers, that first step is electric for him. And it allows him to cover kind of short areas really well. But I think the most redeeming thing of Alohi Gilman is he's just a brilliant safety. He clearly puts in time in the film room. And here in year 3 of Brandon Staley's defense, which has its flaws, of course, but in a quarters-heavy system, if you're a safety back there, they're not asking you often to cover single high or even necessarily come down and man up tight ends and show great athletic matchup ability. Really what it's about is understanding your coverage rules, when you can gamble, when you need to stay back, protect over the top. And Gilman understands that, not just how to prevent big plays, which he's been excellent at, but he understands when he has the green light really to bolt downfield and cut off crossers and posts and stuff. And when he does, he gets there, man. He was really one of the more productive safeties in the league in terms of on-ball production. Yes, only 2 interceptions, but 7 pass breakups was good for 2nd in the league. Those combined 9 pass disruptions are tied for 4th in the league. So he was getting to the ball, really making plays in coverage, and was a very sound run defender from those alignments. Did have a decent amount of missed tackles, but nothing overly concerning. A massive breakout season, actually, for Alohi Gilman. And in a contract year, it's going to be a fascinating player to see what the league kind of values him at, because I think something really clicked into place for Gilman. And if your team's like maybe the Rams or Jets or maybe 49ers, I don't know, I'm spitballing here, but teams that do like to run a lot of quarters and pattern matching zones, Gilman could be a nice free agent signing for you. And this might just be the beginning for Alohi Gilman. So star of the season there, or hell, maybe the Chargers might want to bring him back. I think he could be a good fit here with Minter in this defense too. So we'll see what happens with him in free agency. But like I said, we do have some players to talk about in a negative light, and that's going to start with Austin Eckler, who just simply did not look like the same guy. Everything across the board down, whatever you want to look at, man. Yards per attempt, just raw rushing numbers. His yards per attempt has been about 4.5 yards per attempt the last 3 seasons, down to 3.5 this year. He fumbled the ball 5 times after fumbling the ball 5 times last year, so that's becoming a big issue. Missed tackle force rate and elusiveness rating, career low. Breakaway percentage, down. The number of 10-plus yard runs, where he's had 22, 15, 19 over the last 5 years, down to 7 this year. I hate to say it's like a lack of athletic ability or a drop-off in athletic tools, but sometimes this does happen to these running backs. And by the way, Austin Eckler had close to 1,000 attempts in his 4-year career at Western Colorado. Now has close to 1,000 attempts here for the Chargers. That's a lot of tread worn off the tires there. So we'll see next year as he becomes a free agent here. I think the Chargers most certainly will let him go. We'll see if he's got any juice left in the tank or if this is a rapid fall off for the former Pro Bowler. And then on a younger side of things, Quentin Johnston, my wide receiver 1. That's a take that really has not worked out for me so far. Now, I'm not quitting Quentin Johnston. And even as the year went on, he became a little bit more involved, showed some signs of promise. And even when he got drafted, I was like, he's a little bit more of a long-term projection, needed to work on his hands, needed to work on his ability to use his size and attack the football through contact. Clearly, any form of development was not there, though, in terms of that right there. And contested catch percentage, 31% for a 6'3", 215-pound wide receiver. That is brutal. He lets the ball come to him. All of the fears of being a soft Big 12 football player showed up in year 1 for Quentin Johnston. Hopefully, it can be a humbling moment. Harbaugh comes in, inspires some toughness in him on the field. I'm not calling him soft off the field, but on the field, clearly needs to handle contact better, understand his size and the advantage that it can bring to him. So, again, I'm not quitting Quentin Johnston, and in fact, the actual, just pure drops actually weren't that bad. He only was credited with 2 real drops. Granted, a lot of those were pretty soft contact, disrupting the pass, where something like PFF isn't going to give him a drop if he's got a DB on him, but it was, you should be coming down with that, especially if you're a bigger receiver. So a -3 for Quentin. He is well below this crop of rookie wide receivers that came into the league and were excellent right away. And then before we talk about some of these guys going up for the offense, let's just hit on Gerald Everett there. He's going to come down 1. He had a pretty nice 2022 season that had his ratings on the rise. Didn't really follow that up this year. Just 411 yards on 70 targets. So, the yards per route run down, the contested catch percentage way down, just 27% contested catch rate for a tight end. That is brutal. So, considering the just raw mass between Everett and Quentin Johnston, for them to be a combined 10 of 33 on contested catch looks, that is just not being quarterback friendly. And maybe there's just some natural regression to the mean there for those guys next year, but they got to come down for it, to say the least. But some guys are going up, some role players here. Alex Erickson, my guy. I've been trying to stand that this guy has deserved an opportunity as a slot receiver in the NFL for the 7-year length of his career. Came out in 2016, had a nice career as a punt returner for the Bengals. They never really saw him as a full-time wide receiver, though he did have 529 yards in 2019. It's kind of why I was like, yeah, this guy could probably be a starting slot somewhere. But anyway, he, by necessity, had to get out on the field for the Chargers, and ends up with some nice games out there, man. Week 17 against Denver, 7 catches, 98 yards. He had that big kind of tough catch up the seam that set up. I'm stretching my memory here, but I'm pretty sure that was the Bills game that set up like a game-tying field goal late in that Bills game, like week 16. So made some tough catches. I'm probably overhyping Alex Erickson here, but I think he can play. I think he could be a slot in the NFL and showed that in the second half of the year here. But then Stone Smart, they ended up putting him out there more often. I don't know if I think Everett may have gotten hurt there the last couple weeks, but even before he left the field, they were getting Stone Smart out there, running a little bit more 12 personnel with the backup quarterback in there. And Stone Smart, as kind of a wing player, showed that he can get out there, be a little bit of a mismatch problem. He's got speed. He's ironically, he's like the same exact size as Lil Jordan Humphrey that we just talked about, 6'4", 225. One's listed as a wide receiver, one's listed as a tight end. You know how it goes, but yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of 12 and even 13 personnel with Greg Roman coming in as the offensive coordinator, and they might look at Stone Smart and say you can at least role-wise do some of the stuff that they would do with Isaiah Likely there in Baltimore. And then on the offensive line, a couple guys going up. Rashawn Slater had an excellent year in pass protection, just that franchise lockdown left tackle, continuing to show that he is that guy. And then Brendan Hamus at center. This one was interesting, and Chargers fans, I'm not sure if Will Clapp got benched or injured, but Brendan Hamus ended up starting the last 4 games at center for the Chargers, and he held up very well in pass protection. And this isn't really something I fully considered with Brendan Hamus coming out, but I kind of like it, man. He was a fleet-footed, very sound pass protector. Like, I loved his technique, but his problem was, like, he could not handle the bull rush at tackle. He just didn't have the anchor and couldn't really just reset against that type of athlete in space. But at center, with more confined spaces, with good feet, maybe a couple years in an NFL weight room to add some of that play strength, I'm fascinated that Brendan Hamus might be a center, and I don't want to go as far as saying a starting center, but they do have Corey Linsley, just can't really stay healthy. We'll see what his status is. I don't hate the idea of going with Linsley, see if he can stay healthy, and if not, we'll see if Brendan Hamus can kind of make it as a center, transitioning all the way inside here after being a tackle at Nebraska. So he's got my attention heading into next year. Let's talk a little bit more about this defense. So Austin Johnson, the veteran defensive tackle that was signed here a couple years ago, just hasn't really been a player for them at all. He hasn't been a good run defender. He's been incredibly mediocre as a pass rusher. I don't know if he's a pending free agent or if that was a 3-year deal. I can't remember, but I can't imagine he'll be back. He's going to come down. But these edge rushers did step up, both Tuli Tuipulotu and Khalil Mack, as Joey Bosa continues to struggle to stay on the field. But yeah, Tuli, he didn't sustain the pass rush productivity that he had out the gate, where he burst onto the scene with like 5 sacks in the first month. Was okay as a pass rusher, but I think you still want to see more there. But man, as a run defender, he was incredible. Just so much quickness to slip off blocks. He's incredibly instinctive and physical. He was in the top 10 for defensive stops in the NFL. He was 11th in total tackles for edge rushers. PFF run defense grade. He was 4th in the NFL, so really checking every box you want to see in terms of being a great run defender. It's not like he's undersized either. He's like 265 pounds. Really a good year for Tuli Tuipulotu, who honestly, if I'm going to come out here and say like Kobe Turner should have been in the mix for Defensive Rookie of the Year, Tuli Tuipulotu deserves at least a shout out. He was fantastic as a 2nd-round pick. And if we're going to slam the former front office here, which they weren't great overall, they definitely made the right pick there in Tuli. And then Khalil Mack, a resurgent season here. I really think what we saw from Khalil Mack this year was him kind of revising his pass rush approach a little bit, learning that he can't really do what he used to in his Defensive Player of the Year days, where he would pin his ears back and have one of the most dominant bull rush long arm moves I think I've ever seen. And then, of course, he was able to kind of, do different twists off of that once tackles were so afraid of that. But really here for the Chargers, where he was up there, man. He was 6th in the NFL in pressures. He ended up credited with 17 sacks on the season. Obviously had that 6-sack performance against the Raiders. But he really did it with finesse, which I did not see necessarily coming from Khalil Mack. I think it's just a testament to how smart of a player is, how much he's going to work at it. But just the different swipes and in and out moves and twists that he was doing still has like solid power. He's still Khalil Mack, but not what he once had. I'm just very impressed by him molding his game. Kind of reminds me of like Larry Fitzgerald, when late in his career he didn't have the same athletic ability, stepped inside of the slot and salvaged a really nice, like more than salvaged, just sustained a really nice long career. So impressed by Khalil Mack, curious to see if he's on the market or if they want him back. But let's get to the second level. Nick Niemann, the third-year linebacker out of Iowa, I think has turned into a pretty nice player here. We need to see really more sample size, but an uber athlete coming out of Iowa, a much better athlete than his brother Ben, who's had a very nice NFL career. But Niemann he needed to add play strength and learn the position a little bit more. And from what we saw kind of scattered throughout the season, I think there's reason to believe that there could be something there, at least as like a really good backup. But I do think he has the tools to maybe be a starter. But he ended up playing late in the season, ended up with almost 100 snaps between the last 2 games of the season, and I thought looked the part. So really in both phases, coverage and run defense. So he's going to go up 1, and we can keep our eyes on him next year. And then Dean Leonard, a 7th-round cornerback, kind of a freak athlete out of Auburn, underdeveloped. Not going to come here and like sing the praises that Dean Leonard's going to be a starter or anything, but ended up having to play a lot in the second half of the year here. Had some nice pass breakups, wasn't completely miserable. Did have a couple of games where he gave up some longer receptions against Baltimore and New England. But he gets the playing time, made a couple plays on the ball, and maybe could be a backup here for the Chargers. And then Michael Davis, who has had a rough year, is going to come down, feeling more and more like that incredible 2022 season was just an outlier for him. Kind of went right back to being the guy he was in years before, where you're going to see some impressive pass breakups because he's got the length, he's got the long speed, he's physical, but penalties this year jumped from 2 last year to 7 this year. He gave up almost twice the amount of total yards as he did the year before, credited with 9 touchdowns allowed, which is as many as he gave up in the last 2 years combined. Still impressed by his 2022 tape. I know there's a good corner in there, but I think with his profile, he's probably just very week to week and a polarizing player at this point. And we saw the kind of lower end of his play this season, and he is a free agent this season. So another decision for this new staff to make there. And then Derwin James as well, going to continue his fall for this season. Just the coverage stuff, man, you can tell. He's not a great cover safety. This isn't full-blown Jamal Adams here, but some parallels in terms of like they tried to put him on tight ends and slot wide receivers and asked him to hold up in coverage, and it just he couldn't do that. He didn't really have the fluid instincts to play in the quarters type of system here. So like just from that perspective going down, and then even as a run defender and that kind of impact box safety, it's just been a couple years now since we felt like he was that elite enforcer. He's still a very good run defender, but obviously we had Derwin James rated as probably the best safety coming into the year, and he hasn't lived up to that. He's been a guy that you can attack in coverage. I will say, though, might make my breakout list for next year in a weird way, like a re-breakout, because Jesse Minter is coming in as the defensive coordinator. There's obvious Baltimore connections. They're going to look at what Kyle Hamilton did as a very similar type of player. They're going to look at what he did and just say, Derwin, you're doing what Kyle Hamilton did. And if Derwin James ends up with like LeBron James box scores every week with a sack, 2 pass breakups, defending screens, forced fumbles, and is looking like one of the best safeties in the league again, I'm not going to be the least bit surprised. But until we see that, he's got to come down. And then believe it or not, Chargers fans, I know it wasn't the year you wanted, but in terms of special teams, this was not your typical Los Angeles Chargers. Both the kicker and the punter were some of the best in the league. Cameron Dicker missed just 3 kicks this year, 2 of which were 50-plus yards. He was sensational, one of the best kickers in the league. And then J.K. Scott, who has one of the strongest legs in the league, wasn't shanking punts, getting good field position. He himself was one of the higher-graded punters in the league. So at least you got that going for you, Chargers fans. All right, Kansas City Chiefs, Super Bowl champions, you are up. And I know I didn't do a Super Bowl reactions show or anything like that, but hey, one of my reactions from the Super Bowl is that Trent McDuffie's pretty good at cornerback. First round pick, probably should have gone a little higher in the first round. This dude, there's really nothing to criticize about his game. He's one of the brightest young ascending players at the position in the league. He's athletic, he's quick, he's scrappy, he defends the run. He's great in man coverage, he's great in press coverage. We knew coming out of Washington he was incredibly high IQ in terms of zone. And here into year 2, really looks every bit of a number 1 corner, even though he is the Chiefs' number 2 corner because they have L'Jarius Sneed, or at least they did this last season. But they're going to have some internal discussions about if and how they can keep Sneed and or Chris Jones. But I do think they feel pretty good that they have a number 1 corner here in Trent McDuffie, who put Deebo Samuel in a little box and tucked him away in the Super Bowl and was just very steady all season long and got better as the year went on, too. So Trent McDuffie is sensational. There were some tough picks for star of the season for the Chiefs, but I think with the way that the season ended and McDuffie certainly played a huge role in that Super Bowl, he was a worthy star of the season choice here. But let's talk about this offense a little bit. Can't boost Patrick Mahomes anymore because he's already a 99 in the roster, but he continues to separate the gap between himself and all the other quarterbacks in the league. But at running back, Isaiah Pacheco had a monster season statistically and a monster season on the field in terms of his rushing style. I think it's funny how everybody has agreed that he runs as if he's trying to punish the earth beneath him. It's very noticeable when you watch him. But yeah, he is. I would say he runs like he wants it more than any starting running back in the league, and it's a ton of fun. It leads to a lot of missed tackles forced. It leads to a ton of yards after contact. He's also established himself as a very reliable option in the passing game. Just one drop over the last 2 seasons. It came this year, but on 82 career targets so far, he's only dropped the ball 1 time. So he shows up in that aspect. I will say, some might say 82 is a little low. Well, he does put the ball on the turf. He's got 3 fumbles in each of his first 2 seasons in the NFL, including that huge one in the Super Bowl that could have proved more costly than it ended up being. But also, I just don't think he's got great vision. He's kind of like the Brett Favre of running backs. I know that's high praise, but Brett Favre was always known like, well, I got these incredible tools. I don't necessarily need to pay attention to the mechanics of the position. Isaiah Pacheco, it's like, he's gonna pick which direction he wants to run in. He's gonna hit that hole very hard, and with very good run blocking here, a lot of times that works out. But there are, anywhere from 2 to 5 snaps a game where you're like, oh, Pacheco, there was a gaping hole there that you didn't hit, or he's bouncing something outside. And, so there's some knocks on him, but he is definitely a starting caliber running back. And just on year 2 of his 7th round rookie contract here, he's kind of the prime example of why these day 3 running backs shouldn't be getting 4-year deals, because by the time his contract's up, he's going to have over, 1,000 carries on his resume and have made about $5 million. So no one's going to cry for someone making $5 million, but he definitely plays above that pay grade. But then let's talk about these wide receivers and Rashee Rice, who was certainly a star of the season candidate here for the Chiefs. I do just want to say the front office here for Kansas City, I think, has taken the crown as the best front office in the NFL. It's unbelievable the amount of draft picks that they have hit on that have been, honestly, at this point, an underrated part of this team becoming a dynasty, winning back-to-back Super Bowls. They have hit day 1, day 2, day 3, like 3 years in a row. And Rashee Rice is the perfect example of really why they're so great, because their ability to find skill sets, reproject how a player might be used within their system, the synchronization between really general manager, their scouts, and the coaching staff with Andy Reid and Steve Spagnuolo, all of the continuity there, knowing exactly what everybody likes. And even Patrick Mahomes now, who's like a part of this process, apparently he liked Rashee Rice as well. Now, Rashee Rice was someone I was not a huge fan of in the draft. I had a third to a fourth round grade on him when all was said and done. And sure, some people liked Rashee Rice, but the majority of people that watched him were like, I don't know, man, he's not very good on the outside. He doesn't beat press coverage. He's a little bit shorter for a guy that was supposed to project as more of like an X wide receiver. People were picturing like Cortland Sutton coming out of SMU. And it was like, Rashee Rice isn't really Cortland Sutton. Yet that's how SMU used him. And he was very good, but there was clear deficiencies in his game. But the Chiefs watched his film and they were like, yeah, you know what? He's not an outside wide receiver, actually. But what he is super underrated after the catch. And he is, in his own way, kind of Deebo Samuel-esque. He is Juju Smith-Schuster-esque in terms of being that bully in the short to intermediate game. And they took him where his average depth of target at SMU was 11.2. He was working the sidelines, going vertical, running back shoulders, that kind of stuff. And they said, nope, you're coming here. We are going to use motion to cover you up so you don't have to beat press coverage. And you're going to run slants, crossers, screens, and digs. And his average depth of target for the Kansas City Chiefs was more than half less than what it was at SMU. 5 yards average depth of target. So on average, he's catching the ball 5 yards down the field. And I don't have the exact rankings on this, but 853 of Rashee Rice's 1,200 receiving yards, that's more than 3/4 of his receiving yards came after the catch. I would imagine maybe only Deebo Samuel was more than that. And he became a real weapon for the Chiefs, obviously, with 1,200 yards. Where I will give Rashee Rice a ton of credit is he had drop issues at SMU. That was another thing that I didn't love about him. And Rashee Rice had one of the most reliable pairs of hands in the league with just 3 drops on 131 targets this year. So he's going to come in at an 81 for me. The next step for Rashee Rice as he heads into year 2 is, can he become a little bit more versatile? Can he get better at beating press and be a little bit more than just a guy that runs, drags, slants, catches screens? Not that he needs to be. They certainly can just use him how they used him, and he can be very dangerous. But if we want to start really talking about Rashee Rice as like a top 20 wide receiver or maybe even top 30. I don't know that he's quite there yet, but if we want to get there, I would want to see him used a little bit more outside of this very specific role in this offense. To reinforce that a little bit, he had just 7 targets all season outside the numbers and 10 plus yards. Only 1 target outside the numbers, 20 plus yards. Which, again, it's just so crazy that that's where the majority of his targets came in college, and the Chiefs were like, nope, we're going to use him almost exclusively in the short to intermediate game. Also, what's fascinating is Rashee Rice saw just 7 contested catch targets this season compared to the 33 that he saw in his final season at SMU. And Rice was only 1 for 7 on those contested catch targets. So the degree of difficulty on his catches has not been very high. They've been really deploying his skill set to get him open within that scheme very well. But can he become more of a guy that's going to outmuscle receivers and make higher difficulty catches? Time will tell. I'm only saying this because I think a lot of Chiefs fans will see his production and say 81 isn't too high. But I do think the scheme and usage is doing a lot of the heavy lifting there, though he has shown really good juice and explosiveness after the catch. So there is the Rashee Rice spiel, and I'm very curious to see what his second season looks like. I'm not saying he can't do any of the things we've described. I'm just saying he hasn't yet. But some of these other receivers are going to come down. Kadarius Toney, who was essentially ran out of town here. Don't really need to explain this one. I think I've got him down as like a 38 awareness rating in Madden, which I think is as low as I've ever gone for an individual player. It really is a shame because he has so much physical upside. And I think I saw on Twitter from someone, I'm sorry for not giving credit to whoever found this, he still made the most tackles, had the most missed tackles forced. That's always such a weird stat to roll off the tongue, but he had the most missed tackles forced per reception in the NFL, and that makes sense. But the problem is getting him receptions to begin with and getting him to not fumble the ball when he touches it. So Toney going down, I imagine he'll be somewhere else or a free agent next year. And then Richie James, who they brought in, had a really good year for the Giants last year, but just wasn't able to repeat that, I think in large part because Rashee Rice was busy taking the targets that Richie James usually benefits from, those crossing routes and slants and drags and stuff. But at the same time, just was not nearly the player he was for the Giants the year before, so he's going to come down just one. But then on the offensive line, Wanya Morris, who had to start really the last 6 games of the regular season with Donovan Smith being injured. Morris, a late third-round rookie out of Oklahoma, and it was just very much mixed results. Go against, Green Bay, Buffalo, New England, Cincinnati. He was pretty good. Then he met guys like Max Crosby and the guys we just talked about for the Chargers, and he was not so good, which is kind of what you expect for a third-round rookie. But I am curious. I'm not saying they're going to do this. It certainly would be a little bit of a surprise if they did, but third-round draft pedigree, very athletic guy, good tape coming out of Oklahoma, has now had, I would say, 4 out of 6 starts in his rookie season were solid to good. I'm curious if they internally really believe in him and want to back their investment as a starter next year. We'll see, man. I don't think it's the craziest thing for them, though they obviously have a history of basically not wanting the offensive line to destroy their team like they did in that Super Bowl against the Bucs and wanting to make sure they have insurance policies there. So we'll see what happens with Morris, but I thought it was pretty solid. And then Jawaan Taylor, I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw this. 24 penalties this season. Unheard of. And it's a combination of the false starts and the holding from Jawaan Taylor. And he's been all over the place this season. He came out the gate and we lowered him because of the wicked bad start. And then we raised him in the last episode of Studs and Duds because it looked like he was getting back to being more of that guy that he was for the Jags. And then down the stretch, he was kind of a problem again for the Chiefs. He was not good in the playoffs. Buffalo and the Baltimore Ravens really ate his lunch. And even in the Super Bowl, he played better, but still gave up 5 pressures there. Now, that was going against Nick Bosa. You understand it. But this signing certainly has been mostly bad than good. I still think he's a functional tackle, but at what they're paying him, when he is getting all of these penalties, I mean, that's more than 1 penalty a game. That is just tough. Andy regressed in terms of pressures allowed, pass blocking efficiency, gave up a career high in pressures this year. So had to come back down, and I wouldn't have big expectations for him. And maybe he can turn this around, but I would more imagine that they're more thinking, how quickly can we get out of this contract? Because he's given them kind of low end starter performance for top dollar at right tackle. But Nick Allegretti, how about him stepping up? I was worried when Joe Thuney got injured and missed the last couple games of this playoff run. And I can't say they didn't miss a beat with Nick Allegretti, but he played very valiantly. And I was checking his contract. The Chiefs quietly gave him $3 million before the year started. He had finished his rookie contract, and they liked him enough to say, we're going to give you very solid money for a backup. And then he comes out and does this, plays like a starter really in those 2 games to end the year. He also had a start in the midseason at center and played really well in that game too. So there will be teams watching the film on Nick Allegretti for his 3 starts, and I would not be surprised if they look at him, he was a good player at Illinois. I remember liking him. He was one of PFF's highest graded pass blocking offensive linemen that year, and is praised for his just kind of presence in the locker room. Now has played well. Very interesting name to monitor. I know I keep saying that, but I think that's part of the fun with this series, is pointing out some of these free agents to keep an eye on. And if Nick Allegretti comes out and gets a 3-year, $27 million contract, those that watch Studs and Duds will be able to say, we know why. He seems to have really grown from 2020, when he did have to play in his rookie year, was a part of that disastrous Super Bowl offensive line, but he was a 7th round rookie at the time. Now he's come a long way. He looks bigger and is clearly a more mature player on and off the field. Not that he was immature, but +2 for Nick Allegretti. Let's talk more about this defense. Malik Herring, for some reason, the first guy we're going to talk about here, just because we go by position groups. Very much not much to say, but a 63 rated edge rusher that was a nice 2-way rotational player for them. And then into the linebacker group, because for the most part, I think the D-line did their thing. George Karlaftis, I thought about raising him, but his efficiency actually wasn't great in the second half of the year. We have raised him earlier in the season. Still a good player, but not quite enough to raise him for his second half performance, in my opinion. Maybe worth a note there. But let's talk about these linebackers. They had to step up, of course, with Nick Bolton missing a large chunk of the season. Drew Tranquill was able to do that. He was a little bit of a surprise when they signed him, and I think they were a little bit surprised that they were able to sign him, because he was a decent starter for the Chargers. I think they thought he would get a lot more money out there, and when he was just sitting there, they were like, we'd love to have one of the best backup middle linebackers in the league, and that's exactly what they got in Drew Tranquill. And they really tapped into his blitzing as well, just like Brandon Staley did with the Chargers. Drew Tranquill, I would have to do a tape study to really understand why he's so good at it, but his blitzing ability is remarkable, which is crazy, because he's not the most athletic guy. He's not some great coverage player. He's not the biggest guy. But maybe it's... just thinking back to some of his highlight sacks, like he times the snap really well. Maybe his bend is better than I'm giving him credit for, but that's back-to-back years where Drew Tranquill's been one of the most disgusting blitzing linebackers in the league, and Spags was able to unleash that. But he was steady as a linebacker as well in terms of run defense, and they kind of didn't miss too much of a beat with Nick Bolton going down. They missed a little bit of that physical force over the middle, but still very solid from Drew Tranquill. I would imagine this time around he gets paid a little bit better than the 1-year, $3 million contract he signed here in Kansas City. If nothing else, just to get him off the Chiefs. And then Leo Chenal, I know he hasn't been like a full-time starter yet, because he's had Bolton and Tranquill and Willie Gay all in front of him on the depth chart. I think that time is coming next year with what he's shown and what we're about to talk about here. But I am going to take a victory lap on Leo Chenal, who for the longest time was my LB1. I eventually caved and put Devin Lloyd ahead of him, and Devin Lloyd had a very good year this year, so that's all good and well. But I had a first to a second grade on Leo Chenal. I was slamming teams like the Packers for taking Quay Walker ahead of Leo Chenal, and especially slamming like third round. The Miami Dolphins took Channing Tindall the pick before Leo Chenal, and the Kansas City Chiefs had to be laughing their ass off because they didn't need Leo Chenal, but I imagine the Chiefs loved Leo Chenal, and they're like, we'll stash him. We'll find a way to use him, and eventually he's going to be a really good starter for us. So Leo Chenal, basically, when he's been on the field, he has been one of the most disgusting run-defending linebackers in the league, period, full stop. He's also been a fantastic pass rusher, kind of like exactly the way he was at Wisconsin. This is a 6'3", 250-pound sledgehammer of a linebacker that runs a 4.5. He was at Wisconsin, and that's exactly what he's been for the Chiefs. He was a critical part in his 27 snaps in the Super Bowl, a critical part of shutting down the Niners' run game. Everyone was complaining, why aren't you giving the ball to McCaffrey more? Why aren't you running the ball more? It's because the run game wasn't working, and Leo Chenal blowing up those wide zone runs from that kind of on-ball edge, strong side or weak side linebacker, wherever he was lining up, he was blowing up the play. And it wasn't just the Super Bowl. This is what he did all season long. His 90.6 PFF run defense grade was third in the league behind David Long Jr. and Bobby Wagner. By the way, Devin Lloyd, fourth on that list. He also, by the way, was the one that forced that opening drive fumble on Christian McCaffrey and was the one that got credit for the blocked PAT, even though it was kicked a little bit low from Jake Moody. But, man, he's incredible, and I really hope that they say, Willie Gay, you're a free agent. Drew Tranquill, you're a free agent. We have our guy in Leo Chenal, because I don't think he's shown to be bad in coverage, but he's just been incredibly limited in terms of what they've asked him to do. He can obviously run, but that was the thing at Wisconsin, was he wasn't really asked to cover much, and he is more stiff in his hips. He doesn't really turn super well, but I still think he can be an adequate coverage player and an elite run defender and an elite blitzer. I want to say my pro comp on him was like Demario Davis. I really think he can be that type of player for the Chiefs, and I haven't seen any reason to believe or any reason to change that high upside comp for him. So, gotta be excited for Leo Chenal. But let's talk about this secondary, which this, I think, was capped off by another excellent coverage game for this group in the Super Bowl. But this, I think, is, other than going to get Patrick Mahomes, I think what they've done to build this secondary is this front office's most impressive feat. We already talked about Trent McDuffie. That one came a little bit easier, but they had to trade up to go get Trent McDuffie and jump the Bills, who almost certainly would have taken him. That was a monumental draft move. But the rest of these guys really were not, I guess, like easy picks. I'll just leave it at that. I mean, Joshua Williams, Jalen Watson especially were day 3 picks that weren't really on too many people's radar. L'Jarius Sneed, I liked Sneed a lot personally, but he was a 4th round pick, played a lot of safety at Louisiana Tech, so they had to have the vision to make him a corner in the NFL. Shamari Connor was a guy that tested really well, but didn't have any really exciting tape at Virginia Tech. And then Brian Cook, well, we'll get to him. I'm not going to necessarily rave about Brian Cook as much, but these 4 guys here, Williams, Watson, Sneed, Connor, all 4th round picks and beyond, and they make up what was this year, I think, the best secondary outside of the New York Jets. You have 2 corners here in Joshua Williams and Jalen Watson, who are just super lengthy, super physical matchup corners. Watson is the one that has earned a little bit more trust and a little bit more playing time, but they like both these guys. They'll use both of them and find ways to get them in the right spots. But I just think of physical press man coverage, 2 guys very similar, 2 guys that have both improved their tackling as well in their time here. That was another part of the Super Bowl that you noticed, was these guys, whether that was Connor, Williams, Watson, Sneed, McDuffie, going against the rack monsters in San Francisco. Very underrated how well this group was tackling and staying physical. So you got those 2 guys. And then, of course, L'Jarius Sneed, who I had to think about for star of the season. He has fully broken out as a legit number 1 corner in the NFL. I think he had his sort of come to glory moment in that Week 14 game against Buffalo, where he just really just, I hate to overuse this term because I did it with Trent McDuffie, but he put Stephon Diggs in a tight little box and tucked him away in the corner. 3 pass breakups, gave up just 1 yard, 1 reception on 7 targets against the Buffalo Bills. Like, what a monster performance. He was incredible against A.J. Brown and the Eagles. He has been given some huge responsibilities and has met every single call to the best of his abilities. Now, a pending free agent. There's going to be a lot of money and checks getting waved in L'Jarius Sneed's face this offseason. We will see how the Chiefs navigate this. A tough decision to make if it's going to be either Sneed or Chris Jones, or can they continue to pull off cap magic and get both these guys back. But I will say, with McDuffie, with Watson, with Williams, they could probably stomach losing L'Jarius Sneed, though it certainly wouldn't feel great. But then you get to the safety group, and I'm not going to sing the praises of these guys quite as much as the corner room that I think was exceptional. I think their safety room is pretty good, but Shamari Connor definitely stood out. He's going up a high rise here of +4 because he had to step in for actually the next guy we're going to talk about, Brian Cook. Cook got hurt around like week 12, and Shamari Connor really carved out a nice role. Even started a lot of games full time, depending on the kind of game plan that they were going with, because they also had Mike Edwards and Justin Reed. But when this team took Connor, I had a lower grade on him, but I kind of understood it because he really, physically speaking, matched right up with like L'Jarius Sneed and Justin Reed in terms of just north of 6 feet, versatile kind of slot corner, safety hybrid type with speed and a physical player. His tape at Virginia Tech probably didn't scream 4th round, honestly, and until he had his workouts that were very good, I don't think he was on a ton of people's radar as early as the Chiefs took him. But, they have a type. They found Connor, found a good role for him, and just was a guy, as you watch the Chiefs in the second half of the year, once to twice to 3 times a game, you were sitting there saying, who's number 27? That's the 4th round rookie out of Virginia Tech. Whether it was screaming downfield and blowing up a slant from a hook zone, or just playing from the slot and disrupting a bubble screen, or blitzing, or whatever it might be, he just made plays kind of all over the field. And I think he's going to have a nice role, at least as a dime safety for them next year, kind of like what they were anticipating Mike Edwards to be this year, and Mike Edwards was for them this year. I think Connor can step into that role fairly seamlessly. And then maybe in time will overtake a guy like Justin Reed, who, again, is a similar physical mold. So really like what we saw from Connor. And then Brian Cook, it's funny, he's got the 2 fire symbols, which means technically, like, he's had this great year. He's been going up all year. It's just been steadily getting like +1s every week. I think Brian Cook is a very solid player. I am not going to rave about his season. Sort of reminds me of like a Loie Gilman a little bit, where I was really worried about his play speed, but it hasn't really mattered yet. Could something really click where he's really seeing the game at a high level and making a ton of plays on the ball in his 3rd and 4th seasons? It's certainly possible, but for now, he's been steady in coverage. He's been a steady run defender, a solid player. Still, I think you want to see more for a 2nd round safety than what we've seen from Brian Cook. But it's been far from like a bust too. He's been solid. He's been fine. Deserves some incremental boosts so far for his play. And then we'll wrap up with the kicker. Harrison Butker, I think, was the best kicker in the National Football League this year, as if the Chiefs needed more help. But 7 for 7 on 50-plus yard field goals and 8 for 8 on 40-plus yard field goals. Also made every single one of his extra points. A truly spectacular kicker. And then our very last team, the Las Vegas Raiders, whose star of the season, other than Antonio Pierce, is going to be Malcolm Kuntz, breaking through the weeds here this year. It was supposed to be Tyree Wilson that had a monster year as a young pass rusher, but it was Malcolm Kuntz, who really from like week 9 forward was one of, if not the best, number 2 complementary pass rushers in the entire league. And even then, Max Crosby was dealing with an injury, and Kuntz's ability to kick things up a notch helped this team continue a really good pass rush. He ends up the year with 52 pressures on just 344 pass rush snaps, 8 sacks on the season, 10 QB hits. His combination of bend and power, and I think the way that his pass rush technique that was already pretty good coming out of Buffalo as a 3rd-round pick in 2021, his pass rush technique and the ability to get to counters quickly and all that stuff has only come along. He really can beat you in a lot of ways, and it showed this year. It's eerily familiar. I'm not saying it's going to play out this way, but it's eerily familiar to how this team spent the number 4 pick on Clelin Ferrell, but then it was Max Crosby, the 4th-round pick in that draft who ended up being their superstar pass rusher. Obviously, Malcolm Kuntz was drafted 2 years earlier than Tyree Wilson, but it is eerily familiar to the thought process of like, well, if Malcolm Kuntz is a really great number 2 rusher and Tyree Wilson busts, you can stomach it a little bit more. Obviously, Kuntz, though, heading into a contract year next year could become expensive rather quickly, so it's a different conversation. You still would much prefer that Tyree Wilson turns things around, and we will talk about Tyree Wilson later in the segment here, but let's talk about the offense first. Aiden O'Connell, I think, was very solid. If nothing else, he's going to be a fantastic backup. I'm not sold that he's a starter, as I don't think any Raiders fans should be. If they decided next year is kind of a retooling type of season with the newish regime, it's not that new of a new regime though. They just fired the head coach. But what I'm saying is he played well enough that they can maybe justify starting him and waiting till the 2025 draft to start thinking about a quarterback. See what Aiden O'Connell can do in a full year and an offseason as the starter. He's still a limited player. He's a limited athlete. He doesn't have the strongest arm. But I will say, as far as rookie quarterbacks concerned, you could tell this was a 25-year-old guy that threw 1 million passes at Purdue, came in out the gate ready to play, and was just really solid down the stretch where this Raiders team was winning a lot of games. He did a better job protecting the football than I probably would have projected for him coming out of Purdue, where he threw a ton of interceptions, forced a lot of bad reads. There was some of that, but certainly not to the degree that you would have been worried about. And he even made some impressive throws scattered throughout the season that impressed you too. So a lot of credit to Aiden O'Connell, and I don't think we need any excessive takes beyond that. But let's talk about this running back room. Josh Jacobs, yikes, man. He has come down 7 ratings points this season, a dramatic fall off from being the rushing leader the year before. Poor guy maybe should have played a little bit more hardball with that franchise tag that the Raiders put on him, but the Raiders certainly look good for doing that. I mean, where do you want to start? His yards per attempt goes from 4.9 down to 3.5, half as many touchdowns. What stands out the most to me is he led the league in 2022 with missed tackles forced at 90. He was down to 28 this season. So that jump cut, the contact balance, churning through tackles was not there. That is also reflected in his yards after contact dropping a full yard from 3.4 to 2.35. Also lost 3 fumbles this season. One more major stat to throw at you. The amount of 10-plus yard runs that Josh Jacobs had went from 41 last season to 9 this season. To me, that is possibly the most valuable stat for a running back is 10-plus yard runs, because those, I think, are the most consistent sign that you're making a guy miss, you're picking the right hole, you're getting to the second level. Doesn't necessarily mean you need crazy explosiveness or to make that second guy miss or anything like that, but that's a huge sign of a good running back. And man, Josh Jacobs just fell off a cliff this year. Hard to say exactly why. I don't really think it was running back. I don't think it was really scheme. I don't have an answer for you, but the fall off was certainly there, and he's likely to head to free agency now. I don't know that they're guaranteed to bring him back, especially when they see the way Zamir White ran really in the last month of the season. Josh Jacobs got injured, and Zamir White came in, and their run game actually got better. In 4 games, in the last 4 games of the season, he had over 200 rushing yards and really carried the load. Close to 100 attempts in those 4 games. Could argue it was even a little too much. Now, he wasn't like electric or anything, but certainly showed that he can play like a starting running back. Was a 4th-round pick, a guy I liked quite a lot coming out. I compared him to Damian Harris, and I think we saw a very similar caliber back here for the Raiders. We will see what they do. I wouldn't like slam them if they brought Josh Jacobs back, but I certainly don't think that they have to. But then let's talk about the wide receivers. These 2 veterans are going to come down. It hurts me to do it as a Packers fan, but Davante Adams getting a -2 here. He is 30 years old now. I didn't necessarily see like a lack of juice from Davante Adams. I think he takes very good care of himself and is still every bit the route runner and technician and just great athlete, underrated athlete at the wide receiver position. But the big thing with Davante is drops really were an issue this year. He had a drop rate of 8%. That's the highest he's had in 4 years. But beyond that, the contested catch percentage came down with just 12 out of 34 contested catches. And if you go back to what I said about early Davante Adams, where he was very good, but hadn't quite made that leap from great wide receiver to elite wide receiver, a big thing for him was ball skills. And he jumped, after 2018, he jumped from a guy that just didn't win a lot of contested catches to a guy that was winning 45 to 50% of those looks and started to earn the quarterback's trust to get 25, 30, 35 contested catch targets in a season. And when you have the gravity of a Davante Adams, where you're out here saying, gotta get me involved, blah, blah, blah. Like, I get it. You are that dude. The team should run the offense through you. But when you have that gravity and you're saying, throw me the ball, and then you're not coming down with it, whether it's drops or not showing that same contested catch ball winning ability, you yourself got to come down. He's actually 31 years old now that I look at it. So I still love Davante Adams. Still think he's a great weapon. Still think he's a top 5 wide receiver in the league, and that might even be something a lot of people disagree with, but does need to come down for his season. And then Hunter Renfrow doesn't need as much analysis. This one's weird, man. He just went straight from being top 3 slot wide receiver to getting paid, and then the team forgetting he existed, apparently. And at this point, I think he's just checked out. He doesn't get used, really. He had a mini stretch there, week 11, week 12. He actually got 9 targets. Strange. He came down with all 9 of them for 90 yards. Looked pretty good in those 2 games, but then they got away from him again. I will say, I mean, this is a guy that's had remarkable hands. 2.6 drop rate in 2021, 3.4 the year before that. Even last year on 49 targets, didn't drop a single pass. This year, he jumped up to a 20% drop rate. He had 6 drops on 37 targets. To me, that indicates that he is checked out. He's not focused, and a change of scenery for Hunter Renfrow feels necessary, to say the least. I'm not quite ready to quit him. I think things just got weird here. I mean, he had 111 receptions just 2 years ago. That guy's got to still be in there, right? Like, this was 3rd and Renfrow all day until it wasn't. So he's going to come down again here, and it's going to be fun when he's catching 80 passes for the New England Patriots next year. But then the rookie, Trey Tucker, has had a good rookie season. He has looked like a very useful deep threat here. Stood out at the Senior Bowl last year for his route running. Was an up and down player at Cincinnati, but definitely was a guy that they were looking to get going down the field. Trey Tucker was, if you just look at wide receivers that had at least 20 targets, or even 15 targets for that matter, Trey Tucker had the second largest average depth of target. 19.2 yards was his average depth of his targets on 34 targets. So really one-dimensional, having him push the ball downfield, but did a pretty good job coming down with those 331 yards and just one drop on those 34 targets, which, drops when you're a deep threat are more likely because they're just higher difficulty catches, right? It's harder to look over your shoulder running full speed with a DB trying to come in and break it up than it is to catch a slant, right? So definitely looks the part. They seem to have found their sort of deep threat and flanker there in Trey Tucker. No reason to believe he can't continue to do that and continue to get even better. Like, I think he has the route running as well, by the way, to become more of a full-fledged wide receiver. But the thing is, they've had Devontae Adams and two tight ends and Jacoby Myers, who had a good year too. They just didn't need to use him in any other ways, but I think he can line up in the slot and beat man coverage as well. So I think more still to come from Trey Tucker. And then on the offensive line, I mean, this group, I am curious to see how this goes with Carmen Brasillo, their offensive line coach, leaving for the Giants job. But this group just continued to shatter expectations. The Raiders have taken this motley crew of dudes. You've got Thayer Munford, a 7th-round pick a couple years ago, Greg Van Roten, a 34-year-old journeyman veteran, and Andre James, who was John Gruden's love child here that he believed in when there was really no reason to other than work ethic. And Andre James has turned into, at this point, probably a top 10 center. But really impressive job by this group, and it's a big reason I praise Carmen Brasillo so much. But more individually, Thayer Munford played both left and right tackle this season, was a really good backup. I mean, he, just based on the amount of sample size he got and his contribution to the team, might have been the best, like, we always use that term swing tackle, where, you want a good backup that can play either right or left and come in and not really miss a beat. That was Thayer Munford this year. I don't know that he made a case to become this team's starting right tackle or not. He had, I would just say, up and down weeks in terms of pass protection. He had some rougher outings having to deal with like Aiden Hutchinson and the Jets and all those guys, the Miami Dolphins when they still had both Chubb and Phillips. Those were his worst games of the season, and struggled with Khalil Mack week 15 as well. So that's typically the sign of a true backup. Like, when he gets the tough matchups, he plays poor. And when he's out there playing the Bears and the Patriots without Matt Judon, the Chiefs and Colts, who I don't think have world-beating edge rushers, that's when he gave up a lot less pressures. So I think he's on the fringe in terms of could he be a starter. But I will say his run blocking graded out extremely well. The Raiders' run game definitely got better under Antonio Pierce's reign, and that really lined up with when Thayer Munford was playing here in the second half of the year, paving ways on both sides of the ball. So a very useful player and a potential starter there, Thayer Munford. And then Greg Van Roten, a little bit more self-explanatory, just a 34-year-old vet that's been around the league. Nothing really left to coach the guy, but he seems to have really taking care of his body and made the most of this opportunity. He's going to hit free agency here at 34 years old, coming off a career year. Could be a nice pickup for someone or for the Raiders to retain, though they're going to have a little bit of a scheme change here. I don't know if Roten necessarily fits more of a wide zone blocking scheme at his age, but either way. Then Andre James as well, we talked about it, has just steadily gotten better and better and better. In my mind, he will forever be tied to John Gruden, because I remember when they paid him like a 3-year extension, Gruden kind of named him the starting center, and it was like, really? I mean, he hasn't really proved anything, and just year by year, again, just the growth has been fantastic. He's a really good, sound player in both phases. There's nothing else to really say there. He is going to hit free agency, though, so you've got center, you've got right guard, you've got right tackle with Jermaine Illuminor, who had a very good year when he was able to play. They have got to replenish this offensive line or get these guys back who had really good years. But let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. Another extremely pleasant surprise, and I think a testament of Patrick Graham's coaching is Jerry Tillery kind of emerging through the woodworks here. The former first-round pick for the Chargers at 27 years old had by far the best year of his career, and he's always flashed sort of disruptive ability, but has disappeared from time to time as a pass rusher. But this year he did have the best pressure rate of his career, right about 10%, 29 pressures, got 2 sacks, really settled in as a decent impact for an underrated pass rush down the stretch where his playing time became much more consistent. But the big thing here is how Patrick Graham's been able to make him a functional run defender. You know, the Chargers and Brandon Staley would just stick him at 3-tech and say, anchor, do your job and shut up and go to work. Patrick Graham was able to say, hey, I remember what I did with Leonard Williams with the New York Giants, where I took this, kind of funky, long, technically defensive tackle piece, but is a super athlete, former first-round pick, maybe not always the best run defender, but, stick him closer to a defensive end position. Let him one gap where he's not going to face double teams. Let him shoot gaps. Let him get defensive stops in the backfield. You saw that with Jerry Tillery. He's really settled in, and this was a 2-year, $7 million contract. He certainly continues to maximize on that first-round pedigree. He certainly hasn't played like a $3.5 million D tackle until now. So back next year on a $4 million cap hit, and I don't know that when they signed Jerry Tillery, they expected him to see year 2 of this deal, but I think that's kind of a no-brainer at this point, and I'm actually kind of excited to see if he can take another step forward here in that very much Leonard Williams hybrid defensive end role that he's been playing here for the Raiders. And then Max Crosby, I mean, honestly, his pass rushing efficiency actually took a hit in the second half of the year from where it was at that elite level to start the year, but he was dealing with a super painful knee injury. And even then, I was impressed by his ability to still have impactful pass rushing games. And then he kept everything up, like playing these run defense downs and being, in my opinion, the best two-way edge player in the NFL this year. Debate TJ Watt, Micah Parsons, Myles Garrett, all you want. But in terms of impacting first and second down, forcing pass rush situations, and then teeing off on third down, Max Crosby very well might be the most complete player in the league in that way right now. Led all edge rushers in defensive stops and in run defense snaps. Get this. So Max Crosby, despite having an injury that easily could have led to you saying, well, we're gonna kind of play it safe, save you on early downs and put you out there to do the more quote-unquote impactful pass rushing stuff on third down. Despite going through that for a 6-week stretch or so, he still led all edge rushers in run defense snaps by 40 pass rush snaps. The gap from him to Aiden Hutchinson, which it's funny that was my pro comp for Aiden Hutchinson, the gap from 1 to 2, which was Aiden Hutchinson, is as wide as the gap as Aiden Hutchinson and the 13th player in the NFL. Oh, and Max Crosby's team didn't go on a deep playoff run like Detroit did either. So he had that gap in 17 games as opposed to 20 like Aiden Hutchinson. So his just completeness as a football player is unbelievable. And if he had not gotten hurt, I think he might have had a pretty strong case, actually, to have taken Defensive Player of the Year from Myles Garrett. But again, that pass rushing productivity did drop off. But I don't have anything left to say about Max Crosby. I'm all in on him being a tier 1 elite edge rusher in the NFL. And the like trade rumor talks, not even trade rumor, it's just fans that want Max Crosby on their team saying the Raiders suck and they should trade him. Yeah, just stop it. The Raiders he's an untouchable player. That would be like the Browns trading Garrett or the Cowboys trading Parsons at this point. It's not happening. He is by far the biggest reason this defense, quote unquote, overachieved so much. Him and Patrick Graham, who I think the world of. Unfortunately, their first-round pick, Tyree Wilson, was probably, him and Quentin Johnston were probably the two biggest first-round disappointments this year, and I suppose Bryce Young, if you want to include him in there, but man, not a great year for the Big 12 trying to make a case that their players aren't soft and want to be professionals at the next level. Tyree Wilson was 108th out of 121 eligible pass rushers in pass rush win rate, a PFF pass rushing grade of 50.4, and really for the most part, you just couldn't really find him once the snap happened. You'd see him before the snap because he's 6'6", 270 pounds. But where was the get off? Where was the power? Where was really anything from Tyree Wilson? I thought he was a better player than this. Not going to say he's a bust officially, like forever or anything like that, but God, he's got to kick it up next year, and that's going to be harder to do now that Malcolm Koonce is going to be taking a lot of those snaps. So definitely not optimistic from what we saw from Tyree Wilson. And if he was, a 21-year-old prospect, I wouldn't be quite as harsh, but he was a 4-year player. You would expect him to be a little bit further along. Doesn't look great right now. We'll see what happens next year, though. Again, I'm not anti-Tyree Wilson. I liked him. I like that pick, but you can't not be disappointed in what he did. Then you get to the second level. Robert Spillane was fantastic this season. 140 total tackles, 52 defensive stops. That makes him tied for 17th with Patrick Queen in defensive stops there. And then he was able to kind of bait some quarterbacks and show some instincts in coverage where he had 3 interceptions and a couple more pass breakups to complement that. I'm a big fan of Spillane's game, man, and I liked him in Pittsburgh too. I always felt like he was the better of the 3 linebackers last year between Miles Jack and Devin Bush, but they just couldn't make up their mind. And then with all 3 of those guys hitting free agency, the Steelers just let them all go. Well, good job by the Raiders front office to be like, that guy is pretty good. He probably should have been starting for you all year. They gave him a decent contract. He comes in and balls out. There were Raiders fans wondering if I should have been voting Robert Spillane in for the Pro Bowl, and I think he had an argument to be up there with some of these guys. So really a nice signing, a nice year. He is a quality starting linebacker at this point, in my opinion. And then Luke Masterson, he was much more of the kind of early down, like kind of strong side. If they wanted to get into a 4-3 look, they would put Luke Masterson out there, and in those looks, he probably averaged about 8 snaps a game. Some weeks he didn't even play, but he flies to the ball. He has that kind of gritty, undrafted white dude mentality as a linebacker. It's a stereotype for a reason, and Luke Masterson fits it. So he's a nice piece for the Raiders to have. I don't know that there's too much more to it than that, but deserves a little love here. But then let's go to the secondary. And they definitely had some shakeup here. They were moving pieces around. Marcus Peters gets released. Me having him as the star of the month in our last episode of Studs and Duds, aged like milk. He got himself cut here from the Raiders. But then they picked up Jack Jones. Very fascinating player to talk about here. So he had an incredible last month of football. He was arguably, he was in the conversation for the best corner in football just in the last 4 weeks of this season. He had 2 interceptions, another pass breakup on top of that, and gave up just 3 receptions on 11 targets in that time for a total of 59 yards, and 50 of those came on 1 reception against the Colts. So he was outstanding, and his interceptions, he had that pick 6 before half against the Chiefs. You also see the way he kind of jumps screens and anticipates routes. That's what he was doing in New England as well when he had a couple interceptions as a promising rookie. This dude does his film study. He can tell what's coming. He can pick up on tendencies. And when he's confident, he's got a brilliant first step and great ball skills. As an off-zone corner, Jack Jones has my attention, baby. And when he went to the Raiders, I was a little curious because, not from a scheme point of view, but he got released by the Patriots because he hadn't been playing all that well. He had this sort of off-field, what did he do? Take a gun to the airport or something like that? Was potentially facing prison time. That seems like it's in his past, unless something comes out this summer. But when he goes to the Raiders in Las Vegas, who have had issues with players in those types of off-field issues, I was like, oh, I don't know if that's a good fit for Jack Jones. But it turns out there's a connection there where Antonio Pierce, I think, recruited him at Arizona State, so he's gonna show up for his boy. Yeah, I mean that's a big part of. I mean, it's not a big part, but it's a piece of what Antonio Pierce accomplished here, is bringing in a guy like Jack Jones, who looks like he's going to be a starting corner for the Raiders next year. I don't necessarily know what Jones's like long-term upside is and all that. He's already 26. He's a slender player. He's not the best athlete in the world in terms of long speed. So if they want to run a lot of man-to-man coverage with him, I don't know that he's going to hold up over time at a high level. But clearly there's a lot to like in his game, and earned a job next year as a perimeter starter for them. And then Amik Robertson, I don't know that he's a starter. I do know he can make plays. He did it at Louisiana Tech, had crazy ball skills, got himself drafted in the 4th round. Still, even in a career year here where he had 2 interceptions and a lot of good games, he still had a lot of bad games as well. Teams would pick on him because he's 5'8", and you saw some games where his coverage consistency just isn't maybe that of a starting player, but as a 4th defensive back, a playmaker, maybe a low-end starter when you have secondary problems as the Raiders have, I think he's a fine player, and he's set to hit free agency, but he should stick around as that role for the Raiders or someone else. And then Tyler Hall, man, he is so intriguing to me. They just don't seem to love him. So Tyler Hall was an undrafted free agent for the Falcons in 2020. Never really played until 2022 here for the Raiders last season. And those that watched Studs and Duds last year remember us talking about Tyler Hall, who got on the field late last season and was like dominant in coverage. He gave up just 41 yards in his 6 starts as a slot corner in the final 6 weeks of last season. That's like incredible coverage ability, and was a good tackler. Makes the team this year, but then just, I don't know if he was injured or they just had him buried on the depth chart. His snap counts are kind of all over the place. He only played in 9 games this year. He had 3 games where he played as a starting slot corner for this team, and he was really good in those games. Gave up just 30 yards. 4 receptions on 6 targets in those games as a starter. Snuck back on the field week 15 for 22 snaps. And then the other games that he played in beyond that, it was a snap here, 2 snaps there, 3 snaps here. So, maybe he's not as good in practice or something, but when he's gotten out on the field, he has been literally as efficient as you could possibly ask for a slot corner. It's not like he's terribly undersized, 5'10", 190. His tackling consistency has been exceptional in his playing time. I mean, everything about his production when he's played screams diamond in the rough, waiting on an opportunity and someone to believe in him. Still just 26 years old. So, I don't know, man. That's a lot of time spent on Tyler Hall, who was just a depth piece for the Raiders this year. But if they let Amik Robertson go, I kind of like the idea of playing Tyler Hall next year. Now, it's a little iffy because you have Nate Hobbs, who's an excellent slot corner. Tyler Hall has mostly played in the slot when Hobbs has been hurt, so maybe that's a little bit of the reason that Tyler Hall isn't playing. But either way, kind of the perfect player to finish up Studs and Duds here. A complete potential diamond in the rough player that only the football diehards want to hear 4-minute analysis about Tyler Hall, but that's what this series is all about. And that is going to do it for the last division here. Make sure you go back and watch all of the teams. All of the divisions are all up. Feels good to be done, but it's a little bittersweet, as always. I do want to have one last little kind of announcement for what this series is going to look like next year. I've been kind of trying to sort through like what works for me. Obviously, a lot of time goes into this series. It isn't my most watched or most profitable video considering the time that goes into it and what I get back from it. So it's been a balance that I've been trying to kind of figure out the last couple years. I think I have a plan, though, for next year, and I want to let you guys know what that is, just so you know. And if you see people asking about it, if you could do me a favor and let them know this is the plan. But basically, I'm going to stick with this format where it's by division. I think that works in terms of views and how I work on it. Just kind of, it's a smooth process for me. But we're going to do a half season or a mid-season studs and duds break, if you will. So it'll be like 2 weeks during the season, weeks 8, weeks 9. Next year will be studs and duds weeks. So you'll get 8 studs and duds episodes then. And then same thing that we did here for the end of the season. So it'll be 16 total episodes of studs and duds. I know it's not the frequency a lot of people would like, but for me, it's just not sustainable to do it every week. And I think that's just a natural, easy, good timeline to review the players in the NFL. So that's what you can expect next year for the series. Thanks for hearing me out. And it's officially draft season. We can put the 2023 NFL season behind us. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you for the next one. Peace out.